On May 2nd, voters in the Ann Arbor Public Schools will consider a sinking fund millage. We've received a few questions. To help answer them, joining me is Ann Arbor Public Schools Superintendent Dr. Jeanice Swift.
Hi, Andrew. It's great to be here to answer the questions that we're hearing in the community.
Expansion is one of the areas that the sinking fund millage could be used for if it passes. Can you talk about who these students are? Is this just more schools of choice students that are coming into the district?
Well, actually, Andrew, what the expansion is about meeting the needs of the new housing development, primarily in the north, in the west, and in the southern portion of the city and townships. So we're not talking about schools of choice in those locations. We really are talking about schools that are already full. For example, along the Nixon corridor up north, those schools are already quite full. And yet we know we're going to gain several hundred students over the coming years. Now, the board has elected to use a modular approach, so a transitional approach, so that we're not building wings on buildings until we know for sure how many students will be arriving from the new construction. So yes, we're going to be expanding, not because of schools of choice, but because we're actually going to have more students in Ann Arbor Public Schools.
So I keep hearing about buildings in Ann Arbor Public Schools that are already full, and yet the district is accepting schools of choice students. Can you explain why we're accepting students if some of our buildings are already full?
Thank you. Well, we have 32 schools in the Ann Arbor Public Schools, and certainly while some strategic areas of the city, the schools are quite filled. So for example, at King Elementary in the north part of the city, we have exactly one school of choice student out of the 500 students there at that school. So we particularly are using school of choice students, and by the way, that total number is about 5.8% of our overall enrollment, so about 1 in 20 students in Ann Arbor, but we're using that as a valve into some of the classrooms that are not full at this time.
Okay, that makes sense. But I also hear some people saying that their particular school where their child attends is pretty much full, at least their classroom is, and yet I still see spots open for schools of choice. Can you explain that?
Yes, because schools of choice in a particular school, there may be just a few spaces open in very particular grades. So for example, this happened last week actually, a second grade in a particular school. It's April, it's mid-April, and 2 classes are sitting at 29 students. If that occurs, and we do have a room in the building, we're going to open the 3rd classroom. When we open that 3rd classroom, that will bring all 3 class sizes down to be within that range that we want our classes to be nice sized in the district. So we will open just a few spots here and there, both for in-district transfer of our own Ann Arbor Public Schools students and for schools of choice.
So you're saying that actually in some instances adding schools of choice students will result in a smaller class size for individual students?
That is always our goal, is to hit that proximal class size, which is in elementary, middle, and high school according to the developmental, age of the student, so that we're hitting that class size just right. Students don't just drop in neat little batches of 25. So sometimes we are using an in-district transfer or a school of choice valve to fill in some empty slots and to make all the classes a better size.
All right, so now I understand a little bit more about the schools of choice issue and the overall expansion that we're going to be looking at being able to fund some extra space on if the Sinking Fund Millage passes.
Great.
Please see our a2schools.org website for more information.